to move to the next slide, the agenda. The welcome and introduction and committee update in terms of the membership of this committee, formally appointed through the boards and commissions, governor's office. Don't have any update. They're still working on that list and completing all of the members. Hopefully that's going to be put to bed soon. At the last meeting, we discussed language for the BMPs. We did receive some proposed edits, which you have interlined in a new document. There was some desire for a group to talk about some of the specific issues surrounding, I think, the triple irrigation, drip irrigation. And so, Chairman Riggins, I'm going to turn it over to you to lead the discussion of the BMP language and give us an update on where we are with those discussions where we left off in the last meeting. But I believe we're getting very close. Perhaps we're not all the way there yet, but we'll hear. But I think we're getting very close to having a final work product for you to send the recommendation to the director as it is contemplated in the executive order creating the commission. So, Chairman Riggins, we'll turn it over to you.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon, Chairman Wachowski, and good afternoon to all the participants in our virtual BMP Advisory Committee meeting. Since our last meeting 2 weeks ago, we have held a grower outreach and had discussions, spirited discussions concerning certain aspects that we had talked about at our last meeting. And what I propose to do today, I propose to go through the worksheet and its point systems. And I only propose to talk about those places that have had a change. I don't propose to do it every single one of them, just the ones that have had a change, and not just the changes in the last 2 weeks, but just as a recap to kind of see how this this point system and this worksheet is now working holistically, how it all works with each other, and encouraging. I will take a break at the end of each category. And if there are questions, I would encourage that the questions are asked at the end of each category, so we don't get too far down the road, and we can ask those questions and discuss them pretty close to when they're first brought up. So I will begin, and if we could possibly get the last version of the BMP sign-up worksheet, if we could get that on the screen for everyone to look at as we're talking, possibly.
Chairman Riggins, we'll get that up for you.
Thank you very much. And here it is. And we will look first at category 1.
So, Chairman, I'll just make one observation.
Yes, sir.
First page again, Amanda. I hope we come to agreement soon because we're running out of colors.
Well, I'm hoping that we will find ourselves close to agreement today. An hour from now, we'll know whether I'm correct or not. So here we are with category 1. Category 1 is water conveyance systems. The 2 changes that have been made to this, which was the 4th management plan version. It was also the 3rd management plan version. Concrete line ditch has been more further defined and there's been a component added to well-maintained, so ditches are performing at least as equivalently as something when it's installed. So that was put in. I think it's a good addition. It shows that that particular style of conveyance also has to be maintained. Its efficiency has to be maintained. Also inserted in conveyances, and indeed now in all the categories, there is the existence of a substitute point that can be brought up with the BMP committee and then to the director, or to the director first, or however that particular process is going to work once we get there. For a person that feels they have something that is unique or simply not adequately described by the various things in the point systems, to where they can discuss that and see if that could be worth some points because of their uniqueness and the fact that it's determined, indeed, yes, that is a method that is at least as good or better than those points that we've already enumerated. And as I said, we had substitute in category 3 and 4 ever since the beginning. Now we have in category 1 and 2 as well. So that really is all there is to be said about category 1. That describes its changes and what it's done during this period of discussion. So do we have anybody that'd like to talk to this? Do we have any discussions about it? Or have we got this to the point to where we don't have anything left to say and we can move on to category 2?
Chairman Riggins, I just want to make a point. We amplified as we go into the other appendices, but under BMP 1.4, the substitute water conveyance improvements, I really like adding this here. I like in the other places where the potential point value can be higher, because from my perspective, this substitute water conveyance improvements and the changes proposed throughout this document, I think will further incentivize new technologies, maybe cutting edge technologies. A little bit more points for folks might make it better for them to incur the expense or take the risk to learn how those improvements will really create value for them. So I think we've made a very important positive step forward with that concept throughout this document.
Thank you very much, Chairman Bishowski. I actually 100% concur with you on that. I believe that it was good to see that both in category 1 and category 2, this concept of having a substitute practice that can be talked about at a later time, and its process of going forward is put into the BMP worksheets on the front side. I likewise think that this was a good idea to get this here. Anyone else wish to discuss anything in category 1? Okay, then we will move on to category 2. Category 2, we will remember, even though there's nothing that shows on the sheets, BMP 2.1 through 2.4 have had their point values reduced from the 4th management plan. So these lesser efficient systems have been diminished in their point values to capture the desire to have more efficient systems to be in the BMP. BMP 2.5 remains where it was. There's no change in that. BMP 2.6 remains where it was, other than the fact that the recognized concept of measuring the efficiencies of sprinkler systems is not in the main line, but it's at the nozzle. And we've changed that word in BMP 2.6 to recognize that. let's go now to 2.7. 2.7 actually has had, since we last visited it 2 weeks ago, has had no changes in it other than in its title and in its definition. We had already changed the concept of mainline pressures to nozzle pressures 2 weeks ago. What has been suggested in the discussions that we've been having over the last couple of weeks is, instead of calling BMP 2.7 a non-qualifying low pressure sprinkler system, that it be called a minimum qualifying low pressure system. To go forward in the definition to pick up that concept, the word disqualifying was removed, and it just states that any of the following conditions place a low pressure sprinkler system in the minimum qualifying category, which is 2 points. So this BMP, other than the title and one word to keep things properly aligned in the definition, that is what's changed. So it's a wordage, a small wordage change. BMP 2.8 has changed in a much larger way. It also has the title change from non-qualifying to minimum qualifying. So also the disqualifying condition is now just a condition. The largest change is the drip industry, I believe, probably correctly, I believe it's a fair point they made, that it is very difficult to put an absolute year qualifier on an item that, because of the way it is managed, can have actually very different lifespans. And I believe that's a fair statement. And I believe that the wordage they came up with is a fair way to recognize that. If you remember correctly, we had simply an age qualifier for condition number 1. Now it reads, a pressurized drip or subsurface irrigation system that delivers less than 90% of the original design gallons per minute and cannot be corrected in a way that it is economically feasible. I think this is a fairly high bar. By having that rate at 90%, they are definitely stating that they are keeping their system in a highly efficient condition. Personally, I believe this wordage is superior to the wordage we had prior. Condition number 2 has not changed at all. It is the same as it was prior. And condition number 3 has changed some, but I believe the essential context of it is similar. An hour limitation was changed, which I believe, again, I believe it's fair for people that are not wanting to have a day-to-day potential error be something that is said to be a difficulty that should never have been allowed to happen, because in any of these systems, a very occasional problem can happen that should not be blown out of proportion if it's a very small percentage of the time it happens. The new wordage for condition number 3 has been changed to read, a lack of an organizational policy for management and labor that prioritize that all visible leaks in drip lines and related systems are repaired within 12 hours and to retain leak water on the field. I believe the biggest thing that is a change in this condition is we went from 6 hours to 12. So again, I believe that's a fair limitation. And I believe that the way it's worded is superior to the way it was prior. BMP 2.9 is the same as it was the last time we spoke to it. 2 weeks ago when we spoke to it, there's no changes. BMP 2.10, level systems. Again, the last time we spoke to it, there's no changes. BMP 2.11, we now have the word qualifying. I believe that's the word we had prior. I think we were at disqualifying systems and qualifying systems. Now we're at minimum, qualifying, and qualifying. We have changed the nozzle pressure. We did that 2 weeks ago. And we have removed the word disqualifying conditions and just said that none of the conditions enumerated in BMP 2.7. So again, this low pressure sprinkler system now has none of the conditions that cause a low pressure sprinkler system to be rated at 2 points. Therefore, this qualifying low pressure system is rated at 4 points. BMP 2.12 is exactly the same concept with trickle systems. It is the qualifying trickle system. It is worth 4 points. And the word disqualifying was stricken because the various conditions that create a 2 point circumstance are not present in a qualifying system, which makes it a 4 point system. Our last point of change in irrigation systems, category 2, there was a substitute farm irrigation system potential point put in, just like we did in category 1. One of the differences in this is this substitute practice actually lists that it can be from 1 to 4 points. And the reason for that is in the definition, it states that a new or existing farm irrigation system definition or a different remedy for an existing BMP minimum qualifying condition. The reason we don't know what the points would be is because if you came up with an entirely new irrigation concept and it was highly efficient, then it might be worth 4 points because it's just like a high efficiency trickle irrigation system. It's just like a high efficiency low pressure irrigation system. It's just like a very high efficiency flat level system. But this 1 through 4 points, or I should say the 4 points, could only be awarded if it was a totally different system. You couldn't have a low pressure sprinkler system that's worth 4 points and really get much out of the substitute farm irrigation system. Now, there might be a circumstance that the BMP committee and the director would see a major improvement to a maximum point irrigation system. And possibly they would say, well, that all of a sudden makes this whole system worth 1 more point now, and it's 5 points. The other points that are in here, potential points, occur when we're in 2 point systems or a 3 point system. But again, the absolute way these points would be quantified is after a submittal is made and reviewed by the BMP committee and the director for a decision on how that would be pointed, how it would get its points. I don't believe the ability to list all that complexity is either very easy to put in this format or even would be a good idea to put it in this format. Because what those points are going to be worth is what, when they are submitted at a time in the future, what the people reviewing them, and ultimately the director to decide what it is worth. But since the category 2 systems are worth everywhere from a 0.5 point to 4 points, that's why, as a substitute practice, the extra points have been put down in this fashion. Totally be determined at a later date what those points would be. So that is our discussion on category 2. irrigation systems. And if there's any questions or comments, let's talk about them now.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, Dan Thelander.
I think that the changes that we made to the trickle system, the not non-qualifying, but what we call it, non-minimum, I think those are really good, and it really does sum up the quality of that system that's out there. So for all of the reasons that you said, I think that really captures the difference of the quality of that drip system compared to the qualifying one. So I'm wholeheartedly in favor of these changes.
Thank you very much, Dan. Any other folks wish to talk about any of these changes that have just been enumerated in category 2?
Mr. Chairman, this is Dan Jones. Can I make a quick point?
Oh, certainly, or you can make a long point if you want.
I'll try to keep it quick. I just wanted to touch on the substitute practice point discussion that Scott just laid out, and I think it makes sense to have this potential 1 to 4 point scale, because by definition these substitute practices have to be at least equivalent to one of the enumerated practices. And so if it's a practice that's equivalent to a 2 or 3 or 4 point system, then it ought to be worth the same amount of points. And so that's kind of just summarizing what Scott had said, but just wanted to kind of, there's some pretty good logic to it.
Thank you very much, Dan. Anyone else? Anybody else at this time like to talk on these amendments that we're seeing presented today in category 2?
Mr. Chairman, this is the director. I'm asking for a clarification. Are we anticipating that in the substitute practice category, someone comes to the director with a substitute practice, that the director would then reach out to the BMP committee, help determine if it qualifies and if the points and how many points to attach?
Since we haven't had the ability to have a confirmed member meeting to sit down and actually go over protocol, that at this time is somewhat suppositional. However, in my opinion, the way that you just described it is spot on. The substitute practice would definitely be listed, or I should say submitted to the director. And then the director, I would see at the next time a BMP committee meeting was had, it would be brought up for discussion, opinions would be given, and then it would be turned back to the director to make a decision. That is the way I would see the process working. But as I say, we all haven't sat down to absolutely quantify that, but I think that's what will happen.
So, Mr. Chairman, I need to think about this some more, but maybe a way to think about it is if the substitute practice raised to the level of becoming an actual BMP and no longer a substitute practice, perhaps that's the point in time when the committee might weigh in on that substitute practice becoming a formal BMP above, in this chart, the substitute situation. One of the things we were just discussing while we were on mute is whether or not the director has the authority to change the BMP table, these appendixes, absent the promulgation or adoption of another management plan. We need to look at that with our lawyers. There may be a way to tee that up that gives us the flexibility to do that. There may be language we can write into the plan. Makes it clear we're going to do that and certify that we have the legal authority to do so. And I bring that up in the context of there are no more management plans required under the law. So we need to think long-term how the program can work, how the program can continue to incentivize new technologies, which are sure to come, given that right now, a future director will not be promulgating a sixth management plan. So I'd love to hear folks' Mr. Chairman, yours and members of the committee and the public view on what I just described.
Well, Director Bajowski, I'll jump in on that. I actually have thought it through to the end, how I thought it would be. My concept as I imagined how the system would flow, with the one thing that a person wouldn't want to get into is a situation where you actually tried to change and reinsert a new BMP into this worksheet prior to a time indeterminate in the future that it was a natural thing to be able to be done. And so the way I saw getting around that is if at some period in the future, someone comes up with some new irrigation system that is actually a 4-point system and highly efficient, then, and he is granted, or her, they are granted the substitute farm irrigation system points, then at that time, as a footnote on the bottom of this worksheet, date specific, this substitute practice has gone through committee and the director and has decided it would qualify as a substitute practice with these points. So it would be simply taking the framework that we are setting up right now and listing out determinations that are made over time. And if it's made for a system for one operator, the exact same thing should be totally qualifiable without having to go through committee again, if it's identical, because of the precedent that had been set by the first decision. That would be the way I would see it could be done without having any legal language having to be inserted with changing the BMP worksheets and points that is actually going to be printed in the fifth management plan. You just have it to where the amendments or the decisions go on to quantify substitute practices as they're agreed upon.
So, Mr. Chairman, I think we're close to being on the same page. I would like to find a way and a process that once a precedent is set by the director determining that proposed substitute works under the definition in this document, that the agricultural community can rely on that precedent if someone comes forward with the next on a different form with the same, essentially the same action. I think it is good for the regulated community, it's good for the department not to have to go through a long analysis process in that regard. I don't think in the current substitute practice paradigm for the third or fourth management plan that a proposed substitute practice would only be approved by the director with the concurrence of the committee.
And And of course, Director Buchowski, if it were to be desired, because I don't believe it would be anything that there was disagreement on. I don't believe there could be another box put down below the end at category 4 at the very end of this that gave 5 or 6 sentences concerning how this process would work with substitute farm irrigation, substitute practices, and enumerate it onto the plan at this time. That could be done if a person wanted to make it absolutely positive and done in this way. That would append it onto the plan and make it the process that's used.
So, Mr. Chair, I think my lawyer advises me that we would need such language if a applicant wanted to rely on that new substitute practice without having to go through application to the director. But we were essentially, in my non-lawyerly view, adding that BMP to the list of BMPs in a clear way. And we will perhaps work on some language, send it off to you for your review and additional discussion of this committee that identifies the processes that we're here, as we're talking about them here, if that will work.
Well, it sounds to me that we're all discussing this process pretty much in the same way. So if you folks up at ADWR would like to take a first shot at that language to be put at the very end of the points and plan document, the worksheet document now, just as a qualifier on how substitute points get put down, and then they don't, once they've been approved, then they no longer have to be approved on an individual basis anymore. It sounds like we're all agreeing to that, so I think it's an excellent idea for you folks to try to set that language up, and let's look at it, and we can get that all done here within, that shouldn't be hard to get done within a couple of weeks at all.
Yeah, we'll be able to do that. And again, I'd like for us to do that because I want to make sure that we're doing it in a legal way that is not improperly expanding the authority of the director. We're not improperly restricting the authority of the director. I don't want to end up with something in the plan that might not be a legal challenge if somebody decides to challenge that at some point in the future. Just trying to make it as bulletproof as possible, and that's where lawyers come in.
That sounds excellent.
So we will get something to you, hopefully within the next week.
Thank you very much. And probably should pick 3 or 4 or 5 other individuals who have a pretty good distribution list that they can check with things, because it'd be good to get a good solid look by a lot of people at it. If you wish to send it to me first, and I'll review it in a day, but then we need to get it out so a bunch of people can see it.
Well, that sounds good. I'd like to send it to you. Can review it or share it with the committee members and collectively review it. When we come to agreement in that regard, I think we can send it to the mailing list we have for the participation in these meetings. And also post it as we posted drafts on our website for people to look at and help spur a good discussion to try to close the loop on this. And we might be able to have that loop closed without having to actually do it in another meeting, depending on the level of feedback, right?
To me, it seems that this is a consensus item right now. It appears to be a good way to do it. It's just trying to get it enumerated in language properly. So yes, I think we can get through it pretty quickly.
All right, that sounds good. We'll proceed down that path then.
Okay, very good. Does any other participants here at the meeting have any other desires to discuss any of the amendments and discussions we've had on Category 2 irrigation systems? Hearing none, we will go ahead and move to BMP Category 3. There have been small verbiage changes in several of these that were all touched upon and agreed to at our last meeting 2 weeks ago. The only change that I know in Category 3 that has not already been discussed is in BMP 3.3, which is trickle irrigation, advanced maintenance, drip tape, or line replacement program. It had been suggested, and I think fairly suggested, that the time determination in that point be set out a little bit for the same reasons we discussed in system Category 2, why age needs to be watched carefully. And what's been changed here is the beginning of drip tape changes now begin at 10 years instead of 5, and they end at 15 years instead of 10. That change was suggested. And as far as Category 3, there was a review of all the other small changes that were in it at our last meeting, and there were no disagreements with it. So I really have nothing other to say on Category 3. Is there any discussion or questions on Category 3?
So, Mr. Chairman, maybe what I'm about to ask doesn't work from a technical standpoint. But last time, I think you had proposed that there was the potential for sample of the drip tape to be tested, so to speak. See if it was still working properly. Those are probably my words. Is there some way that we can incorporate into this 3.3 the concept that if someone does indeed test the tape, they might not need to replace it as often as is proposed in the schedule in this BMP?
I do agree with you entirely on that, Director Duchesky, but there is a mechanism here for precisely that. One of the issues in writing these BMPs, as we've all seen, it is very difficult to incorporate all potential circumstances in one of these BMPs, which is one of the reasons why substitute practices has been put into each one of these categories now. I would suggest that this BMP 3.3 is a perfect example of an operator, a BMP operator, feeling that no, I don't think 10 years is the place to start. I think 15 years is the place to start. So he goes out, gets several samples, has them analyzed, submits that to the director and the BMP committee, and all of a sudden now, as a substitute practice, we've decided it starts at 15. And that allows for reality and testing to come in and be utilized in this practice, as it does in other places too. So I think by us taking the timeline out, we've gotten closer to reality. And if there are some operators that think they want to have this point and they want to show how they're correct, they have very, I think, directed technical ways to do it. And I think right through the substitute practices category is the way they make that argument. And I think they would be successful with the argument. Good empirical testing that shows reality is a pretty strong point to put in for a decision by everybody that yes, that they're correct. So I believe that we have it built in. I believe it's here to where these dates get it out closer to what reality is. And then if it needs to go further, all they need to do is exactly what we said. They take some samples and show us. Then it could be popped up.
So, Mr. Chair, we're on the same page. I'm looking at substitute practice in category 3. And while we in this virtual meeting would probably remember what we all said about the ability to do the testing to offset that schedule, I'm not sure 10 years from now, a person reading the substitute practice would reach that same conclusion. Maybe we need to do some wordsmithing in the substitute practice. And we would be happy to do that and send it to everyone like we described for the last issue.
And if the department wishes to try a take on the change of that verbiage and substitute practice, I think we should do that and we should take a look at it. I would, however, when it states that you're going to do a practice that would likely result in water savings or efficiency at least equivalent to the water savings or efficiency that would result from an approved BMP. Well, to me, that states specifically, if you can show that, hey, this drip tape at 10 years, there's no reason to even start replacing it at all. I'm suggesting it should be 15 years when you start. And here is my evidence. And this proves that what I'm proposing is every bit as efficacious and water saving as what the original BMP was. I believe this verbiage gives the leeway to get that done. But I'm more than willing to look at another iteration to see if it can be made better.
Thanks, Mr. Chair, and we'll confer internally and maybe we'll come to the conclusion that what's written does work. Or if not, we'll propose maybe some editing here.
Very good. Anyone else discussions on category 3? In that case, we'll move on to category 4. Category 4 had some word changes that we were talked about and vetted back 2 weeks ago in BMP 4.8. There also was a new BMP, use of polyacrylamide that was discussed last time, but there has been an entirely new BMP proposed in category 4. In this write-up, it's now 4.9, and it is a BMP to acknowledge the quite intensive and effective use by those practitioners that know how to do it, and they can show that it is actually quite effective. And that's the chemical maintenance of trickle irrigation systems. Trickle irrigation systems, just like any of these other irrigation systems, have their fine points where the best practitioners can coax the most efficiencies and the most longevities out of their systems. And the chemical usage in trickle irrigation systems to control or eliminate calcification and organic growth in the system is a very valid practice, not used by everyone. Obviously, those that use it are seeking much more uniform application of water and higher efficiencies. So it has been brought up as a new BMP under agronomic practices that would be included for the trickle system BMP operators. It uses the same qualifiers in almost all of them, is that it must be used annually on at least 20% of the irrigated acreage. And I can state that a lot of the operators that do this pretty much use it on 100% of their acreage. But this is a BMP I do feel is justified in inserting in here, because it is truly a system that will maximize and give greater efficiencies to an already efficient system. And other than that, that's all the changes since 2 weeks ago we have in Category 4, agronomic practices. Do we have any questions?
Hey, Scott, Kevin Rogers.
Yes, Kevin.
Hey, I think we've got Ron Rayner on the line. He was going to talk a little bit more about that new BMP, because I know the director had asked for a little more explanation. So we might give Ron a couple minutes if that's possible.
I would love Ron to speak to the use of polyacrylamide. This would be our BMP 4.10 on the list everybody is looking at. Use of polyacrylamide. Ron, are you there to discuss that with us? Kevin, is Ron there with you, or is he remote from you?
Kevin, could you potentially help Ron with the mute?
I think I got it unmuted.
You're there.
There's Ron. I hear Ron's voice now.
Okay. I did do some checking, by the way. The recommended application rate of the polyacrylamide that we utilize is at 4 pounds per acre. But, the rate at which you introduce it into the water system would depend a lot on the flow, on the size of the head of water. But, we've been using polyacrylamide for many years. We started using it when we were making very precise bed shapes and irrigating cotton seeds up. And so we had a variable row spacing on our rows. Instead of using straight 38-inch, we used 34-42, so that the amount of time it took to sub the water over to the seed was reduced. And by putting polyacrylamide in the water, it would prevent the water from washing any soil away, so your precise shape of the bed was absolutely maintained. And now we utilize polyacrylamide all the time on our steeper slopes. And especially we do that now in the border flood systems, especially when we're planting small seeded crops like alfalfa or small grains, because it'll maintain the integrity, the shape of the border itself, and will not allow little channels to be washed in it because of the steep slope. So it's been a very valuable tool to us, and we use it regularly. It costs close to $3 a pound, so it's not a cheap application, but it's very effective. When you put just the right amount in the water, then the water will not move soil. So whatever the shape of the ground was before you put water on it, it stays that way. And it's also a conservation practice, because you're not putting sediment into your pump back system or into your lower ditches. So it eliminates sedimentation.
Thank you very much, Ron. That's of all the things that are in this worksheet, of all the practices discussed, I have pretty fair knowledge of all of them. And I had never heard about that in my entire life until you brought it up. And I've looked it up significantly since that time. And I believe it is a very justifiable BMP. And I think your description, from what I could tell and what I could study, is very helpful for everybody to understand what is going on with it. Director Gachowski, do you have any questions of Ron you'd like to ask him on that?
No questions but a comment, and I'll just say, given Ron, your discussion about the variability of the concentration depending on the head and other parameters and the cost, I'm comfortable with the language as written, not having a targeted concentration in it, as long as the chairman, the members of the committee, and the other folks on this call are also on board with that outcome.
Very good.
Thank you. Okay. Any other questions concerning category 4? There seemingly none being, we've walked through a proposed BMP management practices program worksheet and point system. And I think at this point in time, I think we can state that we have generally reached consensus on it as far as the regulated community is concerned. And I will turn it back to the department at this point in time for any comments that they would like to put to it, and see where they are, and then move on to our next point in the agenda.
Thanks, Ben. We're discussing that today. I guess, Mr. Chair, we can move then to the point system discussion. We have it now.
Yes.
Well, we have a slide we'll pull up.
Do you wish to start with that, Chairman Gachowski, or would you like me to give an impression from the meetings that we've been having, the thoughts of the agricultural participants that we've been talking to? Would you like me to give a first shot at this?
That would be great, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. The minimum points required are basically a carryover from the original BMP program worksheets that were done almost 15 years ago. And there is a thought here that a change would be good to have. One of the issues about making minimum points too large in any different category is you can actually get into the perverse effect to where if somebody has quite a few points in one category, has 4, for example, maybe has 4 in 2 categories. If you make them have too many points required in other categories, that might be a de facto requirement that they have 13 or 14 points now to be able to qualify. So I don't think anybody has had that desire to have that effect caused. But there is a recognition here that minimum points required probably should change. Farm irrigation systems at 2 points, the entire system of points, minimum qualifying systems, maximum efficiency systems in all of category 2 was actually based around a minimum points required of 2 points. That almost assuredly we feel needs to stay at 2 points because all the work that's been done around that. In reflecting a desire to have larger aspects of conservation and efficiency. In my discussions, I have found that everybody is very comfortable with increasing category 3 and category 4 to 2 points apiece. So that would have category 2, 3, and 4 all having a minimum of 2 points. And then to reflect a reality, and I don't believe it would cause any problems with us having points stacked up to where we would have problems with having to get more than 12. I think there is an agreement that category 1, water conveyance system improvements, should be increased to 3. One of the oldest efficiency and water saving measures that's been employed in the desert Southwest has been getting rid of absorptive conveyance systems that just absolutely waste water. And lined and non-permeable conveyance systems are very important. So to summarize that, it seems to me from the preponderance of discussions that have been had that category 1 ending up having 3 minimum points required, and category 2, 3, and 4 having 2 points required each would be a good place to set this as far as the BMP users and the ag-regulated community, their inputs are concerned.
Mr. Chair, that would be just altering the minimum points in each category as you described, keeping number 2 the same. But not changing the total point requirement, correct?
Yes, not changing the total points required.
So, Mr. Chair, our preliminary reaction, I think, is we appreciate the concept from the ag community of having that additional conservation efficiency requirements be come forth from increasing the minimum points. And at first blush, I think we're okay with keeping the total points the same, 12. We'll think a little bit about that more, but that's, I think, my initial reaction to this. It's sending the right message by raising the minimum point requirement that we're seeking to increase that conservation in successive management plan.
Thank you, Director Machowski. I appreciate your comments. I believe with that discussion of minimum points and total points, maximum points, and the work through we've done over the worksheet in general, I do believe we may have ran out of things to talk about.
So that's a great place to be, Chairman. So maybe we can talk briefly about next steps. We have a couple of to-dos here at DWR on the substitute BMP language that we'll get to you when we have that conversation with you or get your feedback. We'll post that and send it also to our list of participants that we have from our email list. What I want to talk about, the bigger ag stakeholder group that's part of the management plan process. It appears to me that once we finish the couple of to-dos I just mentioned, that we're ready to roll this out with the bigger group, trying to come to closure. If we could do that pretty soon, we're very close, if not on schedule. Ask everyone to try to meet that schedule for both this committee and the bigger stakeholder group. So I'm very encouraged that we've come this far in a relatively short period of time. As members of the committee or members of the public further noodle over what we talked about today and the changes, certainly offer to them to send to Natalie any additional concerns they haven't yet been able to kind of think through. It would help us if we could do that in a way that when we get into the larger ag stakeholder group public process, really can move that process forward and come to closure. So from what I've heard and I've said today, I think we're probably at least 90% of the way there in the larger stakeholder group. Many of folks on this meeting are going to be actively participating in that group as well. So I really want to thank you, Mr. Chair, for the work you've been doing. The growers outreach group that you referred to before, and all the other work that's been done behind the scenes, both in the ag community alone, with the ag community and my staff here at BWR. So we've come a long way. We're on a pretty good glide path from my point of view.
Thank you ever so much, Director Rajowski. I concur with you. I am pleased that we've got to this point. There's been a great deal of cooperation and creativity shown on both sides, and I'm very appreciative of all of it. I would suggest that we try to have a subsequent virtual BMP committee meeting in 2 weeks to finalize any of these last smallish discussion points and verbiage points, and get to a point to where we can, because I think now that there is no disagreement on these things. It's just getting some language that reflects the concept. 2 weeks, have that meeting, get those things done at that time, and sometime before the 1st of May, have the larger ag collaborators group. And I would think, in all fairness, that a great number of the people that are in the ag collaborators group are present in this BMP meeting right now. But have that and formalize an approval of this, and have the ag BMP program as it will enter into the 5th management practice finished with a bow tied on it before the director's 1st of May deadline. I think all that can be done.
Mr. Chair, I see that. Hopefully that date is April 8th, 2 weeks from today. I would ask,
April 8th is good for me.
can it be done at 10 a.m. instead of at this 1 p.m. timeframe? Because I've got something at 1 that I can't really change.
I have no trouble whatsoever doing it at 10. Is there anyone have a critical problem with 10 o'clock? If I think the 2-week time frame trying to get this meeting again, if we can all do it at 10 this time, I am very supportive of that concept.
Now, I'm waiting to see if anyone jumps in or we see anything in the chat. Certainly not seeing anything yet in the chat or seeing anyone asking to speak. So We will work towards that April 8th, 10 a.m. date, and I believe that meeting, we'll schedule it for the normal 2-hour time frame. I'm guessing that meeting is going to be 30 minutes or less.
I believe you're correct.
From my perspective as the chair, I think we've covered what we needed to cover in this meeting. Unless you have anything else, I'll let you do any closing comments and adjourn the meeting.
Thank you very much, Director Buchowski. Again, I would, from a historical viewpoint of observing how these things have worked for a very long time now, I guess it's been 35 years. There was a certain roughness and recollection of times long ago at the beginning of this process that generated a certain amount of angst. But fortunately, both the department and the regulated community saw the job that needed to be done, and communication started in a very beneficial way. And I believe from a process that started with difficulty, I believe everybody that's had a piece of this can be proud to where we've gotten with the agreements and being able to have a consensus product and have it on time. And I'm proud of everybody that's been a piece of this. And with that, if no one else has anything to say, and I'll give us a short pause. And it doesn't seem that anyone does. I'll declare we have a meeting on April 8th at 10 a.m. for the Ag BMP Advisory Committee. And this meeting will call for adjournment. And thank you all very much.
Thank you.